Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, to mask or not to mask? That is the question a lot of Americans are asking this morning. Major airlines have officially dropped their mask mandates, but some cities are still requiring people to mask up. This as the Justice Department considers a legal battle to bring the mandate back as COVID cases rise nationwide. Extremely severe. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says the situation is growing worse and worse by the day in the city of Mariupol. People have been without food, water, and basic supplies for weeks now. The military fight to keep the city in the hands of Ukrainians and the new help the U.S. could send soon. Get your banned books here. As more books are taken off library shelves across the country, the nation's second largest public library system is doing the opposite, making sure anyone, anywhere can read them. We'll tell you how the program works. And in his own words, Prince Harry speaks to our Hoda Kotb about returning to the UK with wife Meghan Markle for the first time since their split with the royal family and his visit with the Queen.
Being with her, it was great. It was just so nice to see her. Meghan and I had tea with her, so it was really nice to catch up with her.
How Harry is adjusting to life in the States and where things stand between him and his royal relatives today. That is a conversation I know a lot of us are looking forward to hearing that we'll bring you this hour. We begin, though, this morning with the fallout from that ruling by a judge in Florida to overturn the federal mask mandate on public transportation.
The Justice Department is preparing to appeal the decision if the CDC determines masks are still necessary to protect public health. But for now, masks are optional on most airlines and forms of mass transit across the country. Some cities like New York are keeping mask mandates in place for its public transportation system that includes subways and taxis. Well, Philadelphia is still requiring masks in all indoor settings. The different rules are creating all types of confusion for people across the country. Some are cheering the end of the mask mandates. Others are concerned about what may come next in the fight against COVID as numbers rise across the country.
I think it's too soon to drop it, personally.
I, on the other hand, am super glad that the mask mandate is dropped.
I think that you're in a confined space, and it's still, the variant is still really strong, and I don't want to get sick, so I'm going to be wearing a mask.
A lot of opinions, even among people who know each other. NBC News reporter Gary Grumbach joins us now from a metro stop in Washington, D.C. Gary, good morning to you. So quickly, walk us through what are the guidelines for masks where you are in Washington?
Hey there, Joe. Yeah, there is no citywide mask mandate here in Washington, D.C. There's no vaccine mandate here in Washington, D.C. You could walk into the metro, no problem, no mask. You could walk into a pharmacy with no mask or no vaccine needed. But that's not the case everywhere, even just around the East Coast. Up in New York City, there's no indoor mask mandate. But to get on the MTA, to get on a bus or a subway in New York City, you do need a mask. But in Philadelphia, it's just the opposite. You can walk around on the SEPTA. You can get onto the public transportation there without a mask, but you have an indoor mask mandate in Philadelphia. And this all comes as all these cities are doing different things. But 31 states and Washington, D.C. are seeing an increase in COVID cases nationwide. So you're seeing cities making a variety of decisions here as COVID continues on.
Yeah, I mean, Gary, what is the reaction to all this from travelers, from commuters across the country? Are they happy the masks are gone? Are they anxious?
Yeah, I traveled actually from here in Washington, D.C. down to Atlanta and back to D.C. on a plane yesterday just to see what the experience was like, who was wearing a mask, who wasn't. Well, I'll tell you, when I left D.C., only about a handful of people were unmasked. But when I got back down to Atlanta, there was about half the airport, half the nation's busiest airport was unmasked. So everyone is doing something a little bit different. Here's what some folks we talked to yesterday had to say.
I think it's a little premature. Working in the health field, I think we're seeing a lot of spikes in the variants, especially in Chicago, where I'm from. We're seeing a lot of issues.
I'm not worried about it. I've had COVID. I've been vaxxed. I've been boosted.
I got underlying conditions, so I have to wear a mask. And my wife, she's going to wear a mask regardless. I think she wear a mask to bed.
Now, one thing I heard from everyone that I talked to that was happy the masks were coming off was the importance of freedom of choice. They're thrilled that they can now make a decision to wear a mask if they want to.
So interesting to hear some of the regional differences there, Gary. So what is the Biden administration's plan here? Do we think they are going to appeal the ruling made by this judge in Florida?
Yeah, so the Biden administration has said that they're following the science. They've said this throughout the entire pandemic, and that's something that they say they continue to do. The DOJ says they're not happy with the Florida district judge ruling on this CDC mandate, but that they're only going to appeal if the CDC says that they believe the guidance should continue to be upheld. So they're continuing to follow the science. Joe?
All right, Gary Grumbach, thank you so much.
Let's now bring in Dr. Bob Lahita for more on this. He's a professor at the Hackensack Meridian Medical School and director of the Institute for Autoimmune and Rheumatic Diseases at St. Joseph Health, also the author of Immunity Strong. Dr. Lahita, always great to have you with us. So do you think now's the right time to be ending the mask mandate on public transportation? What's your opinion on this? And then also, do you think that, as Gary was just explaining, the CDC has to make this case in order for the Biden administration to appeal? Do you think they're going to be able to do so?
Well, cases are going up, Savannah, and that is our concern. The scientific data right now suggests that in all likelihood, you could probably drop the mask if you are riding an airplane, for example, because of the air filtration and the good nature of the HEPA filter. But still, those who are at risk, those with immunosuppression, those who have autoimmune diseases or cancer chemotherapy are at great risk to be infected. And then we have the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated. And you have the mask versus the unmasked. And then you have the kind of mask you're wearing, whether you're wearing an N95 or a KN95 or an N94, and the list goes on and on. So I don't think the politicians or the judicial people should make the decision here. It should be the scientists. It should be the CDC, Savannah.
So, Doctor, you mentioned the fact that these planes have these good air filtration systems. So for somebody who is making this decision right now themselves when they're on an airplane, since that's what the rule is right now, who does want to mask up, is concerned about COVID exposure, but maybe there's a lot of other people on the plane who are not wearing a mask, what should they know right now about the risk?
Well, the risk is about 54% that if somebody is in the plane and they're close to you and they have, whether they have symptoms or not, but they are infected, you're going to get infected. Now, the good news is the BA2 variant only causes upper respiratory symptoms as a rule. So it's not as deadly as the Delta was. However, we have the option of having a new variant pop up, especially with 33 states having increased numbers. So if a new variant pops up, we're going to be very surprised, and a lot of people are going to be very, very sick.
And, Doctor, do you think that this could impact the case numbers that we're seeing, people having masks off on planes? And if we do see a spike, I know cases are already going up, but if it seems related to this, do you think it could mean that we see local officials start to reintroduce mask mandates?
Well, I think that is a likelihood, Savannah, and that is going to be a problem because once you let the horses out of the barn, as it were, it's going to be tough to round them up and get them back in the barn. So we're telling people, oh, okay, you can drop the mask mandate right now. You can drop the mask wearing, I should say, but you're still going to have that possibility of having everybody mask up again if the numbers spike and people start winding up in hospital emergency rooms. That's the numbers that we look at. Not people at home who self-test and never report themselves.
All right. Dr. Bob Lahita, always great to have you with us. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Savannah.
Now to the latest from Ukraine. NBC News has learned the Biden administration is preparing to announce another substantial military aid package this week. According to 3 U.S. officials, the package is expected to be similar in size to the $800 million one the White House announced just last week. The news comes as Russia has launched an all-out assault on eastern Ukraine. And this morning, Ukraine says it will open a humanitarian corridor to evacuate women, children, and the elderly from what's left of the besieged city of Mariupol. We're joined now by NBC News global correspondent Raf Sanchez in Lviv and NBC News White House correspondent Carol Lee. Carol, let's start with you. What else do we know about this new aid package, and how quickly could these resources get to Ukraine's military as the fighting there intensifies?
Well, what's remarkable about this package, Joe, is just how soon it's coming on the heels of another really large package that the White House announced last week. And that really underscores the urgency that both the Ukrainians have to get more military assistance and the U.S. has to give it to them. So this is expected to be around $800 million, could be more. These things are very much still in flux. We're told the president has not signed off on this. But one of the things that it will include include is tens of thousands of artillery rounds. And that, again, underscores how quickly the Ukrainians are burning through some of this ammunition. Matt Miller, an advisor to the National Security Council, talked about this on MSNBC. Take a listen.
Of course, we are always preparing the next package of security assistance to get into Ukraine, because it is true that they are going through these stocks quickly. We've supplied them with 50 million rounds of ammunition, 40,000 artillery shells, just announced last week, as you said, and we've already seen the deliveries from that package announced last week flow into the country.
Now, one of the things that you repeatedly hear from administration officials is that they understand the Ukrainians are never going to stop asking for more. And what they're trying to do is assess what the priorities are, what exactly they need right now, how quickly they can get it to them, and also how to train Ukrainian forces on some of this new equipment, because they just don't know how to use it. So their goal is to get them things that they need, that are their top priorities, and that they can learn very quickly how to use, Joe.
So, Raf, Russia made it official. Their foreign minister announced the official beginning of the new phase of the war, targeting regions that make up the Donbass in eastern Ukraine. So what is the latest on the fighting that's happening there, and what makes this battleground in the east different for the Russians?
So, Joe, the Russians gave the remaining Ukrainian forces in Mariupol until 2 p.m. Moscow time to surrender. It's about 15 minutes ago, according to my watch. As far as we know, the white flag of surrender has not been raised over that steel plant, just as it hasn't been raised with any of the previous deadlines the Russians have imposed. A Ukrainian Marine commander who is inside that factory released a video overnight. He said his forces are outnumbered 10-1. He said there are hundreds of civilians inside that factory. They say they have hundreds of wounded, but they are not planning to surrender. He did plead with the international community to try to broker a deal with the Russians to extract his soldiers and the civilians with them and move them to safety in a third country. There is no indication right now the Russians are going to agree to any kind of deal like that. They have these Ukrainian troops completely surrounded with concentric rings of their own forces. They are allegedly using very heavy bunker buster bombs, to try to clear them out of this plant. But the fighting continues in Mariupol, as it does all along this enormous 300-mile front in the east of Ukraine. The Ukrainian lines appear to be holding, but as Carol was saying, they are desperately in need of artillery. They are pleading for more weapons from the United States, from its allies. And as fast as things are moving, it is not clear whether they will be able to reach the battlefield in time to make a difference. Now, as you said, there was a little bit of good news out of Mariupol. The Ukrainian government says it has secured an agreement for a humanitarian corridor to get some women and children out of the city. We'll see if that agreement holds. Jeff?
So in addition to weapons, Carol, the White House is considering additional sanctions against Russia. How many more options does the administration have when it comes to sanctions? We know they haven't deterred Putin, but what's really the goal here?
Yeah, it's a great question, because the U.S. has adopted a number of sanctions, some of the strictest sanctions that we've seen on really any country. There's a couple of things that they could still do. One is secondary sanctions. That would penalize other countries who do trade with Russia. The U.S. has not wanted to take that step. That could alienate some other countries like India or China, and could hurt the U.S. economy. That's something that the administration has wanted to avoid. The other thing that they're looking at is this designation of Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism. Now, when you talk to administration officials, they say that sanctions that are mandated under that designation, and there are only 4 countries that the U.S. has designated as such, that those are something that are not even as tough as what they've already done. Well, that raises the question of, okay, well, then why not just do it for symbolic reasons? And there is an acknowledgement that this is something that might come to pass, but the U.S. really can't hurt Russia as much as they would like to without buy-in from the Europeans. They have all the leverage. This is something that the president talked about with European allies yesterday on a secure video call, and it's something that they're going to continue to try to get their allies on board with.
And Raf, the UN says more than 5 million Ukrainians have fled their home country. The train system has been vital, getting them out, bringing humanitarian aid in. I know you spoke with the CEO of the Ukrainian National Railway. Quickly, what did they tell you?
Well, Joe, the CEO told us that 95 of his staff have been killed so far. A quarter of his railway lines have been damaged, but he is still absolutely determined to keep the trains running. We also met a woman called Valentina who was going to Kyiv to try to see her dying father. She didn't get there in time. Take a listen to that conversation.
So you were trying to get to your dying father in the middle of a war.
Yeah.
How important was the train for you?
They are heroes. Just to take care of all these passengers, take care of all the Ukrainians, and just support and give these trains.
Now, the train workers are known in Ukraine as the Iron People. They are hailed as heroes, just like the soldiers are. And everywhere you go, people will tell you that they owe an enormous debt to those railway workers for keeping this country moving during wartime. Joe?
That is certainly the case, and hard to hear that so many have lost their lives. Raf Sanchez and Carol Lee, thank you both.
Let's now bring in Lester Munson. He's a senior fellow at the National Security Institute and principal in the international practice at BGR Group. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. So let's start with this potential new military aid package, because it comes just a week after a separate $800 million package. How much could this new aid help in the East? And do you think we could expect to see more aid packages like this going forward? Is this our way of helping?
Yeah, so it's hugely important. The Ukrainians have been very explicit about their needs for more ammunition, more weapon systems. Really, they have needs across the board on the military front. The Biden administration, I think, is taking a very interesting tack in announcing publicly everything it's doing to help Ukraine. Perhaps not quite everything, but a lot of the things that it's doing to help Ukraine, it is announcing publicly. The money from last week and likely for this new announcement of $800 million comes from $13 billion that Congress appropriated over a month ago for Ukraine. So there's a little bit more left in the system. But I think at a certain point here in the relatively near future, we're going to see the need for new money from Congress for assistance to Ukraine.
Let's talk about the fight and the fact that the Ukrainians have continued to outperform expectations. But in the East, it's starting to get much different than what we saw in the early part of this war. Do you think a couple things here? The Russians have either learned from mistakes in their disorganization at the beginning of this and in other regions of Ukraine, or maybe more concerningly, do you think that the Russians could intensify their warfare in a way that has so far sort of seemed to be off limits, starting to use new tactics in the region?
Well, it could be all of those things. Of course, clearly the initial Russian effort to take Kyiv quickly failed. Ukraine won the Battle of Kyiv. Russia is now falling back to a plan B, which is what, frankly, a lot of people suspected before this invasion actually happened, that Russia was seeking to build the land bridge from Donbass to Crimea. And that appears to be what is happening now. Let's remember that Russia first invaded Ukraine 8 years ago in the Donbass. There have been Russian forces in Ukraine for 8 years in both Crimea and Donbass. What Russia is now trying to do is unite them with this land bridge. It goes right through Mariupol. That is why this battle is so important. So this is kind of the baseline need for Russia from a military perspective. And it's entirely possible that what Russia is trying to do is achieve this goal by May 9th, which is the commemoration of the victory over the Nazis from World War II. It's an artificial deadline, but it appears that Russia is really scrambling to have some sort of plausible military achievement by that date.
And Mariupol seems to be the focus of that. Lester Munson, thank you so much for joining us. We so appreciate your expertise.
Thank you.
Let's get a check on your morning news now. Weather?
Bill Cairns is with us. Hi, Bill. Good morning.
Hey, good morning. And it was just cruel yesterday. All those areas that had the heavy snow, and we still have more pictures to show you because, usually in the middle of the winter, we're kind of like, all right, that's enough. I've seen enough snow video. But snow video in April, the middle of April, is just ridiculous. And it was so heavy and wet, it just stuck to everything. Even at this hour, we still have 100,000 people without power. At the peak yesterday, it was 250,000 people without power. Highest snowfall total I saw was 18 inches in the southern Adirondacks. The biggest snowfall of the year was in the middle of April. Pretty crazy for some of these areas. So that's quickly melting, and by the time we get to about Friday, about all of that snow will be gone. So now we have a chilly start to the day. This is in the wake of our snowstorm. And if you had some of those early plants you put out in the Carolinas, northern portions of South Carolina, Virginia especially, Hopefully you covered them up last night because we have had a freeze and a frost in many areas. Raleigh's one of those areas that's down to 34 degrees, Asheville 31. Charleston, West Virginia is down to 29 degrees. So yes, it was and is a cold morning, but the sun is up and it's going to do its job. The April sun is pretty strong. So this afternoon, Virginia recovers into the 60s. These temperatures are still about 5 to 10 degrees below what it should be for this time of year, even all the way up into the Great Lakes. Tomorrow is what we call an average day. Temperatures in the 60s, some hit 70, and then we get a significant warm-up. So it just snowed in Pittsburgh yesterday, and then Sunday, it could be 81 degrees in Pittsburgh. Look at Cincinnati, mid-80s by the time we get to Saturday. So a big change is coming to the east. And as far as any severe weather goes this week, today we're going to be watching areas of Oklahoma, and this will be late in the afternoon into this evening. But I do not expect a tornado outbreak. And for all our friends there that still have white covering their lawn, it won't last long. It'll be gone soon.
Good to hear.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Thank you, Bill. And coming up, the clock is ticking for a judge to decide who some New Yorkers may be voting for in the midterm elections.
The gerrymandering case that's back in court today and the impact it could potentially have on the balance of power on Capitol Hill during the midterms this November. You're watching Morning News Now. In New York, a battle over redistricting maps is back in court today, and with a little more than 2 months until the state's primary elections, time is of the essence.
Yeah, Democrats are fighting to save congressional and legislative maps that a New York state court has tossed out for being unconstitutional and gerrymandered. NBC News senior reporter Jane Tim joins us now to break it all down. She is always following this for us. Jane, good morning. Good to have you with us. So there have been a lot of legal twists and turns in this one. What do we know about today's court hearing?
Savannah, this court hearing is all about whether or not these maps should be used this year. So now the issue of whether they're gerrymandered or not, experts say they definitely are gerrymandered, will not be decided this court hearing or even really considered. It's whether or not they think they should use them this year. There's a lot of reasons why a court might say, you know, you might win on the merits of this case, but we're going to let this map stand. And in no small part, that's because this timeline is very condensed. The census was delayed because of the pandemic. So the redistricting process started late. And as you said, 2 months until that June 28th primary. That said, a court could say, you know, maybe we should consider moving this primary so we can discuss this further before we make this call. But this one, it's all about whether or not they should use the maps this year.
Jane, with that June 28th date quickly approaching, what does it mean for the candidates who are already in office and those who plan to run?
Yeah, great question, Joe. I mean, there are candidates who are campaigning on these lines right now as we speak. And so Republicans have a very high bar to try and prove that these maps are so gerrymandered that the court must step in. Now, we know that courts tend to be pretty loath to interfere in ongoing elections. But of course, experts say these maps are pretty gerrymandered and that there is an argument with the state's new constitutional reforms against gerrymandering. There's an argument to be made here.
And Jane, also, if the lower court's ruling is allowed to stand, what does that mean happens next?
So we're in the appellate court right now, and the lower court's ruling has been stayed temporarily. They'll decide that stay again today. And so the court will go forward. Now, of course, this is the middle court here in New York. We expect this case and the stay, whether or not to use these maps this year, will likely end up in the highest court, the Court of Appeals here in New York, before too long. But again, it's a tight timeline. So really the question is, can they get everything done, all those legal T's and I's crossed before these deadlines to get it done quickly? But I would expect one more appeal before we are done with this stay suit.
All right. A lot of updates to come there then. Jane Tim, thank you so much. And coming up, a new warning for parents about what your young kids may try to eat.
Yeah, snacks that might look normal but are actually marijuana edibles. What parents need to watch out for next in our weekly checkup. Virtual worlds like Facebook's metaverse are exploding in popularity, and now virtual reality could soon be coming to your office. Many companies are shifting their corporate training sessions away from PowerPoint presentations to virtual reality instead, especially for training seminars about sexual harassment. Using a VR headset, employees are immersed in fictional scenarios and asked to identify what they're witnessing, such as gaslighting, racial profiling, or sexism, and how to diffuse the situation. The goal is to engage and help increase an employee's chance of identifying harassment in the workplace. But according to the Washington Post, some are skeptical, questioning if the new technology may end up being a trigger for victims of harassment or racism. Crucial debate is happening in France ahead of the country's presidential election.
Claudio Lavanga joins us now from Rome with that and what else is making news around the world this morning. Hey, Claudio, good to see you.
Good morning, guys. Yes, tonight, the French President Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen, who is the leader of the far-right party National Assembly or National Front, whatever you want to call it, will face off in a televised debate ahead of Sunday's second and last round of the French presidential elections. Now, Marine Le Pen is still behind in the polls, but the televised debate is a make-or-break moment for both candidates that can sway a lot of votes. And in other news, a political activist has become the first person to be officially charged with sedition in Hong Kong since 1997. Tam Tak Chi, a former DJ and politician, was found guilty of uttering anti-police slogans as well as phrases commonly used during pro-democracy protests in 2019, such as "Liberate Hong Kong, Revolution of Our Times." Last but not least, today, 4 million residents of Shanghai will be allowed to leave their homes at last after the latest COVID-19 lockdown rules are slowly being lifted there. It follows a first round of easing last week, bringing the total number of people out of lockdown in China's biggest city to 12 million. Now the city went back into lockdown on March 28 after a surge, once again, of COVID-19 cases, guys.
All right, Claudio, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Time now for your weekly checkup.
NBC News senior medical correspondent Dr. John Torres joins us to discuss the latest health headlines that you might have missed. Hey, Dr. Torres, great to have you with us. So let's start with the one we teased, this new study warning people, especially parents, about the dangers of some marijuana edibles being made to look just like popular snacks. These copycat edibles pose a serious risk to children, of course, in particular. Tell us about this.
And Savannah, this is pretty incredible and can be pretty scary for parents in particular, but NYU actually did a survey and people answered questions anonymously, sent in pictures of their edible products, and they looked at these pictures and found out that some of them looked almost identical to the real products. We're talking things like Doritos, Gushers, Sour Patch Kids, things that children would really be attracted to. As a matter of fact, what's happening is children are getting into these, and nearly 4,000 cases of children under 10 were called into poison control centers because they consumed edible cannabis in the past year. And the Missouri Poison Control said over the last couple years, since 2018, the numbers have doubled in what they're getting called into for children getting into these supplements under the age of 5. And you saw there too, the average amount inside those containers, like let's say a bag of what they're calling Doritos, 459 milligrams, shouldn't be more than 100 milligrams by regulation. So what does this mean? What are the doctor's orders? Well, there's a few things you want to do if you have children. Number one, store them. So keep the products out of sight and the reach of children. Treat them like alcohol or any medicines you have in the house. Lock them away. Number two, modeling. Try not to use these products in front of your children because children like to do what their parents do, and so they will go after these things. And then number three, especially for older children, talk to your children about cannabis use, and particularly about these edibles and what they mean, how much there might be in there, and what happens if they eat the whole thing, which could be dangerous in some cases. And last but not least, remember to have that poison control number with you just in case something happens. And I'll give it out here. It's 1-800-222-1222. Again, that's 1-800-222-1222 in case you need that number.
Another story, doctor, for parents. Our next study focused on a poll from the University of Michigan. Many parents deal with their picky eaters by giving them things like multivitamins and omega-3 pills. So how many parents are doing this, and is it safe? What should they be doing?
You know, if you're a parent with a picky eater, you want to make sure your child gets what they need in order to continue growing. And they found out that half the parents say that with these picky eaters, with the survey, they end up giving their children dietary supplements. By dietary supplements, they mean multivitamins, probiotics, things like omega-3. Parents in the survey, which was interesting, said they think it's more expensive to provide their child with a healthy diet than it is to give these supplements or try to get them to eat the other things. So what are doctor's orders here? Well, doctor's orders are essentially, number one, realize your child is going to be picky, and that happens with children. They typically outgrow it, particularly by the time they reach 5. Supplements are not a substitute for a balanced diet, and for the most part, children don't need supplements. If you think they do, talk to your doctor about them. And remember, they're not regulated by the FDA, so it's kind of the Wild West with supplements, but get creative with their diets as well, because we all like variety is the spice of life, as we say, and children like that just as much. So get creative. And as a parent, I can tell you the one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to turn into a short order cook And so you can't constantly cook everything for everybody. So try and get them to eat what's on the table if you can.
Absolutely. That's really good advice. All right, doctor, last one. Not a lot of people enjoy going to the dentist. I'm one of these people. I do not like the dentist, but a new study from the CDC shows during the pandemic, dental visits dropped even more than usual. What can you tell us?
They did. And on average, even before the pandemic, a third of us ended up not going to the dentist on the average year. That was even worse during the pandemic itself. And so less people were going. Part of that was because the dentist offices were shut down, but now they're all up and running and they're doing very well at keeping you safe. The other thing is we see this decline across the country, the spectrum of the country. So it doesn't matter who you are, less people are going to the dentist. So what does that mean for doctors' orders? Well, first and foremost, realize that the quality of your teeth can affect your overall health. And there are some indications that could even affect your heart health, increasing your risk of heart attacks or stroke. So be careful there with your teeth. Regular checkups are still important. You want to catch these things, as we all know. You want to catch the cavities before they become cavities. And if they do become cavities, you want to get them taken care of before they become rotten teeth, et cetera, et cetera. So just be careful there.
All right, Dr. Torres, appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now, with hundreds of books being pulled from library shelves around the country, there's a new way to access banned books anywhere.
Yeah, the president of the New York Public Library joins us next with his systems plan to make sure anyone can read banned books, even if they're not in New York City.
Plus, changing the genre, Black musicians are trying to make the country scene more diverse. Next, we'll introduce you to the group known as the Black Opry.
Libraries across the country say efforts to ban books have reached unprecedented levels. More than 1,500 books were challenged to be removed from libraries, schools, and universities last year. That's according to the American Library Association. It's the most since the organization began keeping track back in 2000. That has prompted the New York Public Library to launch a new effort to make those books available to everyone anywhere in the country. Joining us now is the president of the New York Public Library, Tony Marks. Tony, good to have you with us this morning. So you've named this program Books for All. Tell us how it works and why you felt this was so important to do, especially right now.
Well, Joe, as you said, we see a massive rise in book banning in this country. And all of us understand that everyone has to have access to books. If they disappear from the shelves, we are taking choice away. No one has that right. America stands for the ability to have access to information. That's what libraries have always been here. Now with this challenge, we've said anyone in the country can come to our Simply E app. You can find it on the App Store. You don't need a library card. You don't need to be from New York. And you can get access to these books and hundreds of thousands, in fact, millions of other books that are on our Simply E app. But we wanted to highlight these 4 books just as examples of what has been banned to say, we can't do this in America. This is not how we should be responding. I know we're all scared. We're all exhausted from being scared. But, blocking kids from being able to read novels, to learn about themselves, to help them with their issues, that's just not right. And, Dwight Eisenhower knew that wasn't right when this was tried in the McCarthy era. So the libraries are all stepping up, and we thought this was one way to reach out to the rest of the country to say, we're here to help.
Tony, when we look over the list of books that are being challenged right now, I think some themes emerge. What are some of the themes they seem to have in common?
Well, a lot of the themes are just issues that are hot button, culture wars issues, particularly around kids figuring out their racial identity, their gender and sexual identity, dealing with the complications that we've all lived through, and some much more extremely in high school can be so challenging. Kids are looking for ways to learn about these issues, to learn about the history that they're hearing debated throughout the country at this point. We can't block them from learning. The library is not in the business of insisting that you read anything, but we are in the business of being sure that you can. And if it's books about race or gender or, Catcher in the Rye, we've got classics that are being banned. Huck Finn is banned. There are even attempts to ban the Bible in this country. This is not right. It's not right for America. It's, think about what folks are fighting for in the Ukraine at this point. They're fighting for these rights. We should not take them away from ourselves and from our fellow citizens.
Tony, real quickly, I want to ask you, what's the response been like? Are you hearing from people outside of New York who need something like this?
Sure. We've seen we've just launched this. It'll be up for a couple of months. Lots of libraries are doing lots of varied efforts, as is the American Library Association. We've seen 11,000 people join us in our Simply e-app and start to take out the books there. We need help getting the word out so that folks know that these books are available. But it's also, we need to talk to each other across the divides in this country. We need to use the media to help us have these conversations, not just to divide the flames. And, that's what we're trying to do here. And we hope more folks will join us and join the conversation about what our values are and what's at stake at this.
Maybe realize that those books can actually help bring us together in many ways. All right, Tony, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe.
Now, there's a push by some Black country musicians from across the U.S. to make the genre more diverse and inclusive. They founded a group called the Black Opry. NBC News Now correspondent Priscilla Thompson got to talk to them in Nashville, the country music capital of the world, of course, and here she is with their story.
Guitars, boots, and whiskey, hallmarks of a country music jam session. But this one looks a little different. All the artists are Black.
What is the reaction that you get when you tell people that you're a country artist?
There's usually like a, I don't really see you as country.
Some people are like, why?
There's a difference between being fine and holding it together.
Some say making their voices heard in the predominantly white and conservative world of country music has never been easy.
There is a feeling of, what are you doing here?
Just last week, a far-right reporter slammed the Country Music Awards for having too much diversity.
Country music's different. It's not Wakanda.
Of the more than 11,000 songs played on country music radio from 2002 to 2020, only about 1% were by Black artists, a recent study found.
Like, I've been told several times that they didn't know how to market me because I was so different. Like, you can be gay or you can be Black, but you can't be both.
That tension felt not only by Black musicians, but also Black fans.
My experience was that of an outsider. As a Black person, when you see like a rebel flag or a Confederate flag, that sends a message, and it's not a good message, and it makes you feel like you're not welcome. And I'm like, I'm not safe there.
Holly G set out to change that experience for both artists and fans last year when she founded the Black Opry, a space for Black people in country music to connect.
We've made it explicitly clear that Black people, whether they be fans, artists, whoever wants to come into our space, they're welcome here.
And the response has been astounding. The group, which began online, is now packing venues across the country, from Philly to Chicago to Austin. Now, the Black Opry is hitting the stage in Nashville, with more than a dozen Black artists expected to perform, and the audience looking back at them will be just as diverse.
We got everybody fooled, oh, but I'm not gonna do this anymore.
In recent years, the country music world has placed an emphasis on representation.
The CMT Equal Play Initiative are dedicated to increasing opportunities for all women in music.
Country Music Television has committed to equal play on the airwaves and launched initiatives aimed at developing diverse artists and managers. Bringing the Black Opry to Nashville, the country music capital of the world, what does this moment mean?
This is a huge moment. It's a new day in country music.
Is a more diverse industry what country music fans want?
We have to actually be the tastemaker to show them, here's another artist that you could be turned on to.
When you present country music in the way that we do, with such a diversity and different stories and perspectives, people that would not call themselves country music fans in 100 years see that and go, oh, I love this.
Our thanks to Priscilla Thompson for that report. And now, during the first 6 months of 2020, consumption of country music grew by 11% compared to the same time in 2019. So good time for this.
Absolutely. Coming up, Prince Harry sits down with NBC News to talk family, life in the U.S., and his recent visit with the Queen.
What it was like for him returning to the UK and how he says his grandmother is doing as her Platinum Jubilee approaches after the break. Welcome back. Prince Harry is in the Netherlands celebrating the incredible achievements of his fellow veterans at the Invictus Games.
And that's where Today Show anchor Hoda Kotb had the chance to sit down with the Duke of Sussex for an exclusive one-on-one interview where Harry also talked about his life in the U.S. and his recent visit with the Queen.
At the Invictus Games, displays of courage and perseverance are everywhere you look.
What they are proving to the rest of the world is that whatever you come up against, whether it's physical or mental trauma, that you can actually get through it.
Invictus, are you ready? It's a message Prince Harry hopes everyone will hear as he cheers on sick and wounded servicemen and women as they compete, like Joelle Rodriguez, a retired U.S. Army Staff Sergeant. Nice. When you had your accident, a lot of people would have thought these are the cards I'm dealt, and maybe have taken it kind of slowly through life. You did the total opposite, man.
You said cards, and that's funny because when my wife came to see me, probably a day after my surgery, she was like, "Are you okay?" I said, "Well, these are the cards I have, so I have to play them." And I said, "So I'm just gonna do what I can to be the best person I can in this situation," and I'm still doing it. That's all we can do.
Joelle is one of hundreds of athletes from around the world empowered by the Games, all supporting each other. There was one woman who came up to me yesterday, and she said something that totally struck me in my soul. She said, "The Invictus Games saved my life." How does that land for you?
It feels amazing. But every single games that I go to, I hear the same thing from so many of them, and that it feels amazing that we've managed to play a part in their recovery, but it also makes me incredibly sad to know that that's how dark it was for them.
You've spoken about, obviously, mental health issues. When you put that heavy backpack down, like people are lugging stuff around, when you finally put it down, do you feel yourself like peaceful?
Yeah, I think everyone ends up feeling lighter, I think is the best way to describe it. For so many people, it's about management. You know the things that trigger you, therefore you try and stay away from that. But what I do know is that there is a light at the end of the tunnel for absolutely everyone.
Everybody. I don't know if you feel the same way. The only thing I want in my life is to feel like peaceful. You've lived in the United States for 2 years.
2 years already, yeah.
Do you feel peaceful now?
I don't know how many people feel truly peaceful. You know, at times I feel massively at peace, but with everything that's going on in the world and trying to help and trying to use the platform and the influence to try and steer people to trying to help. And again, like, I think the biggest concern or the biggest issue that people wrestle with on a daily basis that does provide more anxiety for me and for them is the helplessness. We as human beings are compassionate people, but when your life becomes really hard, it can be, for some, harder to find the compassion for other people. But what I've learned over the years is, certainly for myself, I find healing in helping others. And I think that's what we should really be focusing on.
I love that. You know, I feel like life happens on a random Wednesday. Like, here's an example. Some people say, "Oh my God, I'm going to go on a vacation. My life's going to be great." And it's like exclamation points. The vacation, the graduation, the marriage, the baby, those are all up here. The other exclamation marks are down here. It's like sad things that happen, loss, divorce, whatever. Most of life is Wednesday. It doesn't have the highs and it doesn't have the lows. It's just Wednesday. What's a Wednesday like for you? Random.
What's a Wednesday like? Like it revolves around the kids as much as humanly possible. Like this whole working from home stuff is not all it's cracked up to be. Certainly post-COVID, because it's really hard. But when your kids and you are in the same place, it's really hard to separate the work from them because they kind of overlap. So, I mean, Archie spends more time interrupting our Zoom calls than anybody else.
Does he have your personality?
But he also gets us off them as well, so that's also a nice thing.
Is he kind of like you? He's got a little bit of the your thing?
What's my thing?
Your cheeky thing,
My
that thing
cheeky
you do.
Yeah, no, I think so.
Yeah.
He's look, I always try and keep that. I think that, the cheekiness is something that keeps you alive. As I said, there's so much to be happy about in the outside world, but there's also so much to worry about. My sort of mantra now every day is, and it's a dangerous one because I need to make sure that I don't have burnout, but is trying to make the world a better place for my kids. Otherwise, what's the point in bringing kids into this world, right? It's a responsibility that I feel as a parent, that you probably feel as a parent as well, and we can't fix everything. We know that. Yeah. But what we can do is be there for each other.
You obviously made a lot of news recently. You came home to the UK. You saw your grandmother. How was that?
It was great. It was really nice to see her. Be able to see her in some element of privacy was nice. I hadn't had a chance to go back to the UK for a couple of years, apart from those 2 times, one for my grandfather's funeral and one for unveiling a statue of my mum.
How did it feel being back? Being with her?
Being with her, it was great. It was just so nice to see her. She's on great form. She's always got a great sense of humour with me, and I'm just making sure that she's, protected and got the right people around.
Well, you make her laugh. That's what she always says. Did you do it again?
Yes, yeah, I did. Both Megan and I had tea with her, so it was really nice to catch up with her. And home for me now is for the time being, it's in the States, and it feels that way as well.
Does it?
Yeah. We've been welcomed with open arms, and it's got such a great community up in Santa Barbara. So
you feel like that's home more for you?
Yeah.
Is that weird to say?
No, but I'm sure it'll become a thing.
Your grandmother's going to be 96.
Yeah.
What's the best thing about her?
It's her sense of humour and her ability to see the humour in so many different things. We have a really special relationship. We talk about things that she can't talk about with anybody else.
I love that.
So that's always a nice piece to it. But I think after a certain age you get bored of birthdays.
You do? You think she's bored of her 96? She won't be bored of the Jubilee, will she?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so. she's had a few Jubilees now, so everyone is slightly different, but I'm sure she's looking forward to it.
Do you think you'll come?
I don't know yet. There's lots of things with security issues and everything else, so this is what I'm trying to do, trying to make it possible that I can get my kids to meet her.
March marked 2 years since Harry stepped back as a senior royal. Your family at home, do you miss them?
Yes, I think, especially over the last 2 years, for most people, have they not missed their family, right? The inability to be able to get home and see them. Of course, that's a huge part of it.
But do you miss your brother, your dad?
Look, I mean, for me, at the moment, I'm here focused on these guys and these families and giving everything I can, 120% to them to make sure that they have the experience of a lifetime. That's my focus here. And then when I leave here, I get back and my focus is my family, who I miss massively.
You do, I bet.
Of course I do. They're two little people,
I was thinking about a new life. Like, you got a whole restart. You have a whole new focus, a whole new nucleus. How does that land with you?
No, I think the focus is very much the same. Right?
Is it?
Yeah, certainly from my and my wife's point of view. For the two of us, this was a life that she signed up for and that we were committed to doing together as a couple forever. Because of the circumstances, we've now moved that life of service to the States, and we'll continue to do what we were doing before. So in that regard, nothing's changed for us. It's just a little bit more complicated to have to sort of restart.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
What do you love about fatherhood?
Oh, what I love about fatherhood? All of it. The chaos, the learning, the reminder of just every element of yourself, your soul, right? When you're not a parent, you can get sucked into all sorts of different stuff, and you maybe sometimes forget who you are. And suddenly, as a parent, especially now Archie at the age he's at, asking all the questions.
What does he ask?
Just those questions of the why. He's into the why stage. Why this? Why that? Why that? And instead of just trying to move it on, I give him the most honest answer that I can, and then it goes on and on and on until he's satisfied, and then that's it. It's done. Otherwise, it ends up with, because the world is round and that's the way that life is.
That's just the way it goes.
So it's like, I love it. I love every part of it. I've always wanted to be a dad. I've always wanted to have my own kids, and now I've got two little people who I'm responsible for.
Do you tell them, or do you tell Archie, he's old enough, about your mom?
Yes, yeah, very much so. I don't tell him all the stuff that happened, but certainly that this is, Grandma Diana, and we've got a couple of photos up in the house.
In these moments, do you ever feel your mom's presence?
Yeah, no, for me, it's constant. It has been over the last 2 years, more so than ever before. It's almost as though she's done her bit with my brother, and now she's very much like helping me. Got him set up, now she's helping me set up. That's what it feels like, He's got his kids, I've got my kids. The circumstances are obviously different, but no, I feel her presence in almost everything that I do now. But definitely more so in the last 2 years than ever before, without question. So she's watching over us.
I'm sure she's proud of you.
I'm sure she is.
Prince Harry carrying on his mother's commitment to making the world a better place as he honors those who triumph.
To be able to see Joel and his family just flourish in moments like this, it means everything. But it comes back to the very simple thing, which is the power of sport. Not just physical, but the mental rehabilitation that it takes is phenomenal. But none of it would be possible without the mindset. They are proving that the impossible is entirely possible, mainly with the strength of a mindset saying, I can achieve anything. I've done this before, I'm going to do it again.
Well, that was amazing, and you can see even more of Hoda's interview with Prince Harry starting at noon today on Today All Day.
Hearing him talk about his mom like that was quite powerful. That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.